Last week, we discussed the scene in the Garden of Gethsemane, where several hundred soldiers with torches, lanterns, and weapons arrested Jesus. We pick up today with where they will take him. Chances are good that if I asked you to tell me something about Annas, you might tell me a little, but you wouldn't know much, because none of us knows much about Annas. But I've learned a little more background that I'll share with you today. Remember when Jesus went to the temple and he got so angry with the money changers that he drove them out? He declared, "It is written that my Father's house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." Here's a description of that incident from William Barclay. The sellers in the temple were not traders, they were extortioners. If an animal was brought from outside the temple, the inspectors were certain to find a flaw, requiring the worshiper to purchase an animal from the temple booths. And as you would expect, the price inside the temple was many times, maybe 10, 15 times as high as purchasing a sacrificial animal from outside. These booths that sold sacrificial animals in the temple were known, according to Barclay, as the bazaars of Annas. It was this Annas of John 18 who was regularly exploiting the Jewish people for money in the name of religion, and he had amassed a fortune. The Jews hated Annas. Now, Jesus, who had turned over the tables of the money changers, that incident that hurt Annas' bottom line and humiliated him, now that Jesus has been captured. And Annas has given instructions to bring Jesus to him first. He plans to be the first to gloat over the capture of this Galilean who humiliated him in his place of business. I'll add another thing about Annas. You know from the passage that he is the father-in-law of the high priest. And I trust you know that the office of high priest was the most prestigious position in the Jewish community. The high priest, the first high priest, goes way, way back to the days of Moses. It was Moses' brother, Aaron. And then it passed down through the line of Aaron every time the high priest died. It was a position held for life. But when Rome took over Israel, the position of high priest became a matter of contention, going to the greatest sycophant, the man who was most willing to toe the line with the Roman governor. Annas had served as high priest from the year 6 to the year 15. Then 4 of his sons held the position, and now his son-in-law holds it. The family of Annas was immensely rich, and one by one, the family members intrigued and bribed their way into the office, and Annas remained the power behind it all. You're learning more today about Annas than you expected to, aren't you? What this all adds up to is that the Jews hated this man. A position that should have held great respect, the high priest, had been corrupted for many years now, and the family that had successively filled the seat was despised. Jesus is taken inside Annas' house, and we'll find out what happens there. But John pauses to tell us a little of what happens outside. First, John only tells us about 2 disciples. Simon Peter and another of the disciples followed Jesus. John refers to this anonymous disciple several times in his gospel, and is generally believed to refer to himself. So Peter and John follow Jesus as he is tied up in the garden, taken out, and led to Annas' house. Presumably the other 9 disciples did not follow. I'm going to park on Peter for a little while. I will not claim that he loved Jesus more than the other disciples did, but he loved him differently. You might recall last week, Peter showed himself to be Jesus' pit bull protector. When Jesus was threatened, Peter grabbed a sword and tried to save him. As Jesus is tied up and taken away, Peter is one of only 2 who goes with him. Consider for a moment the danger of being associated with Jesus. In the garden, when soldiers are arresting Jesus, just standing by him could mean that you get arrested too. And now that Jesus has been taken away, most of the disciples seem to be breathing a sigh of relief that they didn't get taken with him. But Peter puts himself on the line and continues to align himself with the Master by following him. When they arrive at Annas' house, he has to stay outside the courtyard. But soon, John intercedes for him, and he is allowed not into the house, but at least into the courtyard, a little closer, where perhaps he will be able to hear something of what's going on inside. And this is where it gets tense. All he wants to do is listen. He yearns to know what is going on inside this house. What is happening to the Master? Will John step out and fill him in? Will voices be raised so he can actually hear what is being said? He is completely focused on trying to find out what is happening inside with the Master when suddenly he is blindsided. Are you one of that man's followers? Suddenly he is back in the garden facing those soldiers, knowing that association with Jesus could mean his own arrest. Why does he lie and say he doesn't know Jesus? Why does anyone lie? Why does a 4-year-old lie? Fear. Fear of what can happen if you tell the truth. A little time passes. I don't know, let's say 15 minutes. Perhaps the others around the fire notice the expression on his face. Anguish, intense listening, self-condemnation, reflection. Whatever Peter is feeling in this moment, it is strong and has him completely in its grip. And they see his face, and they know that whatever is going on inside him, it has something to do with what's going on inside that house. And so they ask again, why does this matter so much to you? Are you one of his followers? And he denies it again. Fear and precedent. How can he change his answer now? He has already committed himself to denial. Then, a man who had been in the garden, a man who saw Peter wield the sword, a man related to the cut-off ear guy. This is getting close to home now when he presses the point. I saw you in the garden. Sit with Peter a moment. This is the worst night of your life. The Master, the one you were so sure is Messiah, has been arrested. He's being questioned and not likely to get justice. You tried to protect him in the garden, only to humiliate yourself with poor sword skills. You tried to follow to know what would happen next, but you couldn't get close like John was able to. So while you stood in the courtyard trying to keep warm and close enough to hear, you heaped more humiliation on yourself by acting cowardly. Who knows, but if I admit to being his follower, they might arrest me also. Now the sun comes up, and you want to crawl into a hole and hide. How has everything gone so horribly wrong? Jesus is a good man. He's done nothing worthy of arrest. He heals. He teaches about God. He calls God Father and tells us that God loves us. I know, I'm absolutely convinced that this man is the one our people have waited for thousands of years. This man is Messiah, no question. What in the world is happening? And how in the world did we get to this point? Wonders Peter. It is crucial that we see Peter, warts and all. He was the first to confess that Jesus was Messiah, the Son of the living God. And soon, just a month or two from now, he will be a spiritual hero, preaching powerful sermons, touching many lives. If his shadow falls on you, you might be healed. But here in between, in John 18, is a side of Peter he probably wishes John had not written about. Cracks in his character he didn't even know were there, and likely wishes he could hide. But if someone never admits to stumbling, how can they encourage us when we stumble? If someone hides their failures, how can we share our failures without fear of rejection and judgment? Peter might have preferred John to leave out this shameful part of his story, but thank God John put it in. In Peter, we find a man God can use, not because he had such a great track record and was an all-around great guy. We find a man who wept over his sin, who thought he could never again have a place beside Jesus. A man who felt such remorse, he didn't know if he could show his face to the disciples again. We find a man with real sin and real remorse who found real forgiveness. And if that doesn't encourage us, I don't know what will. If Christ will take Peter back into the fold after Peter denied him repeatedly, what makes us think we have done something so terrible that Christ is sure to kick us out of the family this time? I'm grateful to John for including this part of the arrest story. Let's move inside now and find out what happens with Annas. Since it is night, I envision this scene happening in Annas' home rather than in an office. Annas feels like he has the home court advantage. A man who cost him significant money and pride a couple years ago is now standing bound before him. Annas is feeling powerful in this moment, in charge, that he has this Jesus right where he wants him. He thought he could waltz into the temple and turn over my tables, sending my cash boxes flying, causing havoc with my well-oiled business. Now I'll teach him who is in charge here. Who are your followers? What kinds of things are you teaching them? Annas did not want the answers to those questions. If he wanted to know, he would have sent a couple men to follow Jesus, see who his followers are, listen to what he's teaching. This scene is about dominance. Annas is going to show Jesus who is in charge, who has power over whom. Jesus calmly replies that Annas can find his answers by talking to people who heard him teach. I've always taken this answer at face value, but according to some sources I checked with, there's more to it. According to Jewish law, a prisoner could not be asked questions that would cause him to incriminate himself. Maimonides, an esteemed Jewish medieval scholar, puts it this way: our true law does not inflict the penalty of death upon a sinner by his own confession. Annas violated the principles of Jewish justice when he questioned Jesus. Not only did Annas think he was more powerful than Jesus, but this former high priest thought he was above the Jewish law. That is what Jesus is pointing out when he says, "Why are you asking me this question? Ask those who heard me. They know what I said." In other words, you know the law. Call in lawful witnesses. Annas thought he had Jesus right where he wanted him. Instead, Jesus reminds him about proper procedure. Take your evidence about me in the proper and legal way. Examine your witnesses, which you have every right to do. Stop examining me, which you have no right to do. You have no authority over me. One of the temple guards understood what was happening and slapped Jesus for his impertinence, but Jesus remained calm. The man who could have broken the ropes that bound him, the man who could have called angels to rescue him, the man who could have walked out of this house a free man, remained calm. If I'm speaking the truth, why did you hit me? There was no answer. Annas sent him along to someone else. We have several characters in this story. We have Peter, who loves Jesus and believes he is Messiah. His greatest wish is to walk closely with Jesus and never be separated from him. He is bewildered by this evening's events and dismayed at his own reaction, attacking someone with a sword and now denying he even knows Jesus. We have Annas, who thinks he has authority over Jesus. He's probably irritated that Jesus is not intimidated by him. He gets no satisfaction from this encounter, and he sends Jesus away. And thirdly, we have the onlookers, including the soldiers and the servants by the fire. They seem to watch the events of the evening with no apparent engagement or reaction. They are disconnected. In this life, we get to choose how we will respond to Jesus. Will we be like the onlookers, watching from afar, disengaged, living as if Jesus doesn't matter? Will we be like Annas, taking the attitude that Jesus should do what we want him to do? I dare say I have walked in those shoes. Or by the grace of God, will we seek to be like Peter, following as closely as possible, even though we have seasons of bewilderment and often don't understand what is happening, yet always striving to stay close? It's up to us. What will we do with Jesus?